We will move on to Linda Hart, who is coming to us from Finland. Linda.
I'm going to talk about a feminist op-ed, a so-called Sunday essay I published 3 weeks ago in the biggest newspaper in Finland, Helsingin Sanomat, and the reactions that followed. By profession, I'm a researcher in sociology, but let's say everything that I've done relating to gender identity politics and feminism in recent years has been in my free time. But of course, publishing this essay in such a high-profile newspaper in Finland then also kind of mixed up my free time and my professional roles as well. Here you can see how they even made a mention of the essay in the editorial front page, and then a couple of pages later there was the whole essay of this. This newspaper used to be a broadsheet, like physically a broadsheet. Nowadays it is in tabloid format, but it is very much a broadsheet type of newspaper, which of course has also a wide digital reach. My essay was published on the 19th of January, so that was just one day before Trump's inauguration, which has made the context of discussing gender identity politics and women's sex-based rights in Finland then kind of tricky, as there have been more than one gender-related executive orders coming from Trump's office. I very much tried to make the point in rather bland and neutral language, as it was really for the wider public, that talking about biological sex or two sexes must not be shunned and it must not be stigmatized politically. There is a federation of women's organizations in Finland called the National Council of Women in Finland. In November 2024, they published a call for a strategy against hate speech and hate crimes in Finland, encompassing legal gender, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics as motives for hate speech. As it happens, in Finnish legislation, a couple of years ago, sukupuoli, which means sex and gender, we only have one word for it. Sukupuoli is mentioned as a factor of aggravation in the criminal law nowadays, since a couple of years ago. So you could get a heavier sentence if the crime you commit can be argued as having been aggravated by the person's sex. But the National Council of Women in Finland, which has about more than 70 member organizations, and is unfortunately very captured by trans politics, it wants to see all these other aspects that relate to our sexed bodies and existence receive much more political attention and perhaps legislative attention too. As it happens in the Finnish Act on Equality between Women and Men, which is implementation of CEDAW, since 2015 we have had sukupuoli, which is sex and gender identity, and gender expression, all three of them as prohibited motives for discrimination. So gender identity is enshrined in Finnish law, but it's in the Finnish political context, it's really important to make a distinction between sex and gender identity. And in my piece, I argued that sex matters in areas such as violence, use of force, sport, and reproduction, which we all know. But just to give some context, Finland is one of the few countries in Europe where we have mandatory male conscription. So 2/3 of the male age cohort complete military service. For women, it is voluntary. But it really is something that, in the Finnish context, your physical and then your legal sex really affects your course of life. And then if men do not wish to complete military service, they can do a kind of a civilian option, or they might be exempt due to health reasons and so on. But it really affects a person's life course in Finland. And nowadays that we have self-ID for adults, then actually it's your legal sex, legal gender that affects, that dictates whether you are regarded as a legal male and under this mandatory conscription duty. To continue, in the piece, in the Sunday essay, I argued that self-ID is a rather recent political invention. Like I mentioned, in Finland, now people over 18 can subjectively change their legal sex, but it is not required by human rights norms binding the Republic of Finland. So, for example, the binding interpretation of the European Convention on Human Rights, coming from the European Court of Human Rights, it does not stipulate that that member states of the Council of Europe must offer self-ID of legal gender. And minors are not able to resort to self-ID in Finland, but that was very much on the political agenda during the reform of the Legal Gender Recognition Act just a couple of years ago. The Finnish Green Party, Left Alliance, a so-called feminist party, and a women's association, which was formed by suffragettes about 130 years ago. All these four organizations have puberty blockers for gender dysphoric youth in their written political programs. This is something that I also mentioned. As I was really trying to make the point that are these political parties and are these women's organizations and federations of women's organizations really of the view that we are just bundles of sex characteristics that could be altered already in teenage years? As we all know and have heard, scientific evidence for blocking young people's puberty for the reasons of gender dysphoria. Scientific evidence for this is very much lacking. This has been reported in the same newspaper. Cass Review has been written about in April 2004. And there were even new systematic reviews on these issues that came out of McMaster University in Canada just a couple of years ago, actually just a few days after I published my essay. In my essay, I wrote about the Supreme Court case of United States versus Scrimetti for the first time in Finnish media. And I wanted to highlight that lots of lesbians, gays, bisexual, feminists, and even maybe we might call them old school transsexuals, oppose pediatric sex trait modification. But all in all, then I really thought that this essay would be rather forcefully ignored by the organizations that I mentioned, as that has happened before. For example, when the Tavistock, or it was there was an article in Helsingin Sanomat in 2023, spring 2023, about Hannah Barnes' book Time to Think and the Tavistock Clinic, and it was the first time Tavistock was really written about in Finnish media. That was very much ignored by all these organizations embroiled in gender identity politics, and also the article on the Cass Review in 2024. But for some reasons, I really hit a spot, let's say. There were, during the following week, there were opinion pieces from some individual people, but there was a joint opinion piece by 3 NGOs opposing me and my text. The 3 NGOs were the National Council of Women in Finland that I mentioned in the essay, the 130-year-old suffragette-based organization, which is nowadays then very much into this intersectional type of feminism. And they had been joined by LGBTIQ Finland, which is the equivalent to Stonewall UK and so on and so forth. These 3 organizations wrote a joint rebuttal. There was also a rebuttal by 2 academics that I've personally known earlier. And then there was one from an academic defending me, she actually mentioned Sex Matters from UK and the Swedish equivalent for the National Council of Women in Finland, who actually have been against self-ID. But really, what was interesting in all the reactions was that they all focused very much on the rhetoric of diversity and in what in Finnish is called this kind of diversity of gender, and the diversity and multiplicity of both sexes and genders, to be honest. And there wasn't really much to take home from those reactions, because I would have thought that the organizations would have defended something like why they have mentioned puberty blockers for gender dysphoric youth in their political goals. But this was very much lacking. And also in the social media posts that these organizations then published, I don't want to focus too much on the individuals in this debate, but really on the organizations. All the three organizations, they published social media posts where they said that, like, I didn't have my facts right and so on and so forth, but no one pointed out any factual errors. I have done my homework. I know what I'm writing about. I've been learning from my international sisters for many years now and following international media on all these different issues. But interestingly, as we have local elections coming up, both municipal and then kind of regional social and healthcare council elections this spring, there was quite a lot of commentary on social media, most notably from candidates from the Green and Left Alliance parties. This was published just a few days after my essay, but we must bear in mind that there was also Trump's inauguration and the first one of these gender-related executive orders that was very much publicized in Finnish media as well. So just a few days after the essay, there was a social media post from the Finnish Green Party on Instagram and Facebook where they wanted to tell us that the scientific fact of the day is that there are more than two sexes or genders. We don't really know what they mean. Oh yes, we do, because they wanted to go in their wider response. They went on and on about how DSDs or so-called intersex conditions then somehow prove the point that, like, there are actually more than two sexes. But there was a lot of commentary from a variety of different angles, and I really was quite surprised that the Green Party would go down this route, and many other people were quite surprised, because then the Left Alliance, they very much went for ignoring this debate, which I think was, like, much wiser from their ranks, even though they share very much the same political ideas and goals as the Green Party in these matters and sex and gender. But let's say for many people in Finland, the word sukupuoli really means sex, as it's also the dictionary level definition for this word. And they can be from all different walks of life and age groups. They can be men and women. They can be of very different political outlooks, but they are very much confused, and some even then annoyed by the fact that then the genderists, if we might call them that for short, want to claim the word sukupuoli and argue that it means gender identity. So what kind of lessons can be learned from this? It's been an interesting 3 weeks, also personally, because I have known many of these people working in these parties or these NGOs or the academics myself. We must bear in mind that there are also people defending this ideology for very personal reasons, and the personal reasons then can be connected to young people and severe psychiatric comorbidities. It really is something quite real. But let's say on a political level, it is of paramount importance that all parties to this debate, both in Finland and elsewhere, are able to argue their case, or the lack of it. Personally, I think scornful commentary was surprisingly easy to bear. After following all of this for so many years and noticing that the argumentation is very much the same all over the world, or I mean, all over the Western world who participate on talking about these things on social media. There really was nothing very new. And I kind of understand people who are very confused about my text, that it really might have been new information for them that some feminists, lesbians, and gay people oppose gender identity politics. And that many people think that, for example, many people in both the United States and other countries think that in the US context, state-level bans on pediatric sex trait modification are a good thing. Social media can be apt for responding, but of course one needs to disregard slurs and focus on factual information. So if someone said, for example, in the Facebook comments of one of these organizations that I don't know what I'm talking about, that I've really made it up, then I just give them a few links, including WDI USA and Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender and stuff like that. And when it comes to, I'm very much of the opinion that like it really is helpful that we let everyone speak, we let everyone publish their rebuttals, because then the wider public can see what this is all about. And thinking back to this global context at the moment, I suppose Trump's executive orders will just accelerate what would have happened in due course anyway.